Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, May 21st, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And with us this week, once again, AEI honcho and columnist with the Wall Street Journal, Matt Continetti. Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Matthew or Matt, you can call him either way, I guess.
My friends call me Matt.
Yes,
My
so
friends
everyone in this
podcast
audience is your friend.
The commentary audience
Yes.
are my friends.
Your friends, sure. That's right, yeah. Okay, so Matt, we had many topics we were thinking of starting with. You would like to start with the ballroom. So let's start with the ballroom.
Yes, let's start. Well, why do I want to start with the ballroom today? It's because the ballroom is turning into a sort of mess. Very unusual at this point in the Trump administration for there to be a mess, but in this case, we have a new mess, and that's the ballroom. So the Senate was intending to include quite a bit of money for the Secret Service in the reconciliation package that is very slowly making its way through Congress. Remember, this reconciliation...
Can we quickly explain what a reconciliation package is? Just like 60 seconds.
Okay. So, as you know, to pass a bill through the Senate, it requires 60 votes. Any bill that is controversial, because if you don't have 60 votes, you can't break a potential filibuster on the bill, unless you go through this legislative process called reconciliation. And reconciliation is a way of passing legislation through the Senate intended to be limited to debt, deficits, taxes, fiscal policy, budgets that does not require the 60-vote threshold. You can pass a reconciliation bill on a simple Senate majority. And indeed, as has been the case in recent administrations, this is the preferred way for an administration that has narrow control of the Senate to pass their legislative agenda. Biden did this with his bills, including the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Trump did it last year with the One Big Beautiful Bill, or as it's now called, the Working Families Tax Cut. And thanks to the disaster of the government shutdown earlier this year, where the Department of Homeland Security wasn't funded, the Republicans have decided to fund ICE and Border Patrol for the rest of the Trump administration. So through the end of 2028, by passing a reconciliation bill. Now,
Which needs 51
votes.
And which exists because it involves the spending of money. Often the way that the trick here is when administrations actually are trying to use the spending of money as a trick to pass massive policy changes.
Yes.
And there is a whole ruling. The Senate parliamentarian decides whether or not this bill is actually about spending or about policy. Policy has to go through, needs 3/5, but spending only 51 votes.
That's right. And you're right to point out, John, that the decider, the person who judges whether something can be included in a reconciliation bill or not, is the Senate parliamentarian. And the process
who is not a senator, but is an official, a staffer,
a functionary.
Functionary. Member of the Senate deep state.
Yeah. And the process by which the Senate parliamentarian calls balls and strikes on whether something can be included in the reconciliation package, that is called a bird bath after America's most famous Klansman, Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia. So here's the problem. As we all know, there was the third attempt to kill Donald Trump in a year and a half at the recent White House Correspondents' Dinner. And after that event, Republicans and the Trump administration said that they want to increase the Secret Service budget in this reconciliation bill. They wanted to appropriate $1 billion in the reconciliation bill for the Secret Service, $200 million of which would be devoted to the construction of the new White House ballroom that will take over what was once the East Wing of the White House. Now, one might ask, I thought when Trump bulldozed the East Wing for his ballroom, he said, don't worry, I've raised the private money to build the ballroom. So if that's the case, why would the Congress be appropriating $200 million for the ballroom? Well, my Wall Street Journal colleague and friend Kim Strassel has done some excellent reporting here. She found that the reason they need to have the money for the ballroom in the reconciliation package is because a judge has ruled that construction on the ballroom can't go forward because Congress did not authorize the new ballroom. So it's not really about passing the money for the ballroom. It's about passing congressional language saying Trump can build his ballroom.
But then it could be $1.
It could be $1.
It could literally be $1.
It could be $1 for their ballroom.
Yeah.
Well, I think I think that's a great idea. That's like the Price is Right option.
That's why the money is involved. So we can get to that in a minute too.
Yes. In any case, this has become, like I say, a mess because Democrats have seized on the issue and said
pounced, you might say.
They pounced. Democrats have pounced, and they're saying, why are Republicans spending $1 billion? Again, the billion is for the Secret Service alone, but they're saying, why are Republicans spending $1 billion on the ballroom at a time when most Americans are feeling the pain at the pump from the Iran war and other costs? And Republicans, nervous Republicans, have said, yeah, why are we saying that? we don't want to cast a vote for the ballroom now. And as a result, it looks like the ballroom funding will not be included in the reconciliation bill. That was the headline this morning. And I have to say, this is profoundly frustrating because I don't know what the Trump administration does now. Right now, there's a big pit on the White House complex. And if the construction doesn't go forward, that pit's going to remain there until presumably there's a new occupant in the White House.
Welcome to New York City real estate. This is what happens. Developers buy a site and they try to create fait accompli. They knock the buildings down, and then there is a hole in the ground, and then the litigation begins. And you can, in the annals of New York City right now, sitting right next to Congregation Shereth Israel, which is the congregation of Meir Soloveichik, Commentary's Jewish commentary columnist. They tore down a building in order to build a new community building. The community does not want this and has been suing. And for 6, 7, 8 years now, there is a hole in the ground. So Trump did New York real estate game. It was like, I'm taking this out before you can even say boo. The East Wing will be gone. Now what you're going to do, stop me? Well, guess what? It turns out that maybe stopping him is a positive political play, that he has now outfoxed himself.
I think outfoxing himself is a phrase that can be applied to a lot that's going on in Washington right now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it's not just a New York real estate thing. This is a very Trump thing. I mean, with everything, he sort of breaks ground in a grand ceremony. And then before long, you go, wait, where are we at with that now? What's happening? It goes for the war. It goes endlessly for tariffs. It goes for deportations. It goes for, there's this this very decisive broadcast
Opening gambit.
opening
move.
gambit, and then before long you have no idea where the project's at.
I think the interesting aspect of the ballroom too is that news came out, which by the way makes perfect sense. And then Trump said he was angry and someone leaked it and it would be terrible and the person who leaked it should go to jail. But the ballroom is apparently not just the ballroom, that there is an idea of putting in the under the ballroom, sort of like in the movie Dave, literally now, which is a comedy movie from 1994, a hospital and some, I assume, very high-tech, surviving the nuclear war hardened silo or facility.
And Trump also said that the roof it will apparently be a drone pen that he said will be able to protect all of Washington, D.C. And I should also add that it's not, even though the judge said the construction can't go forward, it does appear that construction is still proceeding. And we know this because Trump recently held a press availability on the site of the ballroom, and in the background you could hear the hammering and and the drilling. And so again, he could just defy the court, this level court, and try to get his case knocked up to a higher level to allow him to do it without the congressional authorization. But what is a necessary idea, and again, right, this idea that we're broadening it out to all of the Trump phenomenon. Trump was right to say the White House should have a ballroom. I've driven by the White House when they're holding a grand function, and there are all these tents, and it's a mess. And if it's raining, everything, the White House should have a ballroom. Other presidents have added to the White House complex. But I think in his kind of contempt for normal procedure, he has landed himself in this difficulty, right? And that's the tariffs, like Abe said. That's a whole other aspect. That's kind of where we find ourselves in Iran, where he didn't proceed like other presidents have in making the public case and getting the congressional authorization and getting the allies lined up. He just built up his forces and then struck. So that kind of contempt for normal procedure, I think, really does cost him. I should say, though, there are areas where the grand gesture does produce results, and I would point to the fountains. The fountains in Washington, D.C., they're running during the summer. They've been repaired. They're beautiful near my office here in DuPont Circle. The fountains are running. Meridian Hill Park, which had been kind of a lackluster, dangerous place for a long time. It is in bloom, and it's a beautiful fountain there. And of course, he, as Trump said just on Truth Social yesterday, the reflecting pool is coming along, and it should be pretty spectacular. It seems like him and our favorite Trump official, Doug Burgum, are really cooking up some stuff with the reflecting pool, or the special solutions or something to make it especially fabulous.
I want you to know that yesterday I took a long trip in very hot weather, in New York. I had to go to Queens and everything, and I was wearing my Doug Burgum for President hat.
Yes, sir. As you used to call him, Governor Schmecky Schmeckstein.
Yeah, exactly. But he did have the best, until Zoran Mamdani, I have to say, who had a fantastic logo. The only fantastic thing about him, Doug Burgum had the single best logo of any candidate in history, and therefore, I think aesthetically is an appropriate official to be fixing the reflecting pool. But to get back to this sort of larger point then, look, if Trump were at 48% approval rating, a lot of the troubles that he is having here would kind of go away, because some of the Democrats would think, look, the people, but the people he's trouble to get into a fight with. He's got resources that we don't really understand, and that, we better treat him as being formidable. They don't really think he's formidable. Republicans think he is incredibly formidable, and he just showed how formidable he is inside the Republican Party with these primary victories against the Republicans that he doesn't like. But Democrats are not scared of him if they ever were anymore. And they see not only opposition to him, I think, as, the necessary, and they're, turning back authoritarianism and all of that. But this is pure jujitsu. Like, they are benefiting from striking at him when he does not have much in the way in the tank of throwing anything back to them that isn't simply a sop to his base, which he already has.
Yeah, there's also the issue that by interfering in the primaries, unlike really any other president I can think of since FDR, he's creating enemies within the party. So what we find with the war authorization vote that just happened the other day, ever since Operation Epic Fury began, the Democrats have bringing these War Powers Act resolutions to the floor of the House and the Senate, and they've usually been blocked. But in fact, in the Senate, it passed a cloture vote recently. Why? Well, because Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who had just lost a primary to a Trump-backed candidate, is now going YOLO in his final months in the Senate.
And Tom Tillis,
who Trump essentially forced into retirement. He not only forced the Trump administration to drop that supercilious indictment into Jerome Powell, the former Fed chair, but he is also becoming much more outward in his criticism. And next week, if John Cornyn loses the Senate primary in Texas to State Attorney General Ken Paxton, John Cornyn is probably going to be more vocal in he's always been kind of independently minded, and he's a team player, but we know he's not the diehard MAGA type, and that would be more the case, I think, if he loses next week. So when the Senate majority is this narrow, right, with only 53 senators, you're creating enemies. You are undermining your own position.
All right, so let's talk about one thing that I think Tillis and Cornyn and Cassidy would be a hard, good vote for, which is hawkish Trump, that is how to proceed in the war. And we're starting to get real outward signs that militarily the ceasefire, which according to the Wall Street Journal this morning, I haven't done the math, that's why I'm citing them, but I assume that it's true, that the ceasefire has now lasted longer than Operation Epic Fury. So just think about that for a minute. So the war, the peace has been longer than the war. I know it's not really a peace because
it's about right? It was about 5 weeks of Operation Epic Fury, and now it's almost 8 weeks of this ceasefire, which began on April 8th.
So it isn't really a ceasefire because Iran is, of course, firing.
Yeah, well, it's an American ceasefire. It's like a unilateral ceasefire.
Yeah, right. But Iran, nearly hit
it's a
nuclear
pit stop. When one car takes a break to get its tires changed and everything else, the race doesn't stop.
Yeah, but the race is still going. That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Okay. So, and we're getting weird. There's stories now coming out. CNN has a story that the Iranians are rebuilding their drone capacity. We hit them, and they really were out of commission on drones. But of course, that's a very easy thing to get restarted. Drones are not hard to make. As long as they can get the components. Missiles are hard to make, getting to proper telemetry into a ballistic missile is no easy task, particularly if they're all buried or destroyed. But they're getting their drones up, and that means,
What's maddening about it, though, is that I'm sure, given where our intelligence and surveillance is on Iran at this point, I'm sure it's a very easy thing to prevent them from making drones were we still in firing mode.
Right. Well, that's, I think, the point, which is that the ceasefire has now, if you assume the ceasefire is part of a larger war, we have handed the enemy the rope with which to hang us. I mean, that is to say, even if we're also trying to manufacture munitions, I don't know how the pipeline works for American munitions, and whether it's like a 24-hour, system. We do spend $1 billion a year on our military. So it's no joke that, it's not nothing is going on.
$1 trillion a year.
Excuse me, $1 trillion a year. Did I say
more than $1 billion?
Yeah, we said $1 billion. We spend $1 billion every 8 hours or something like that.
We want to spend $1 billion on the ballroom.
Yeah, right. Okay, so we're probably doing stuff to replenish our stocks, but you don't want to do this. Like, you don't want to let the enemy get a break, take a breather, all of this, and then they're doing what people who are in a weaker position do when you go to a negotiating table. Oddly enough, you think it's the other way around, but they're saying no. They're at the negotiating table saying no. Then we come back, then we go back, and we say something, and then they say no again. And until we are ready to say, we are done with you, the way Trump finally said, I'm done with you on the negotiations over Hamas and Gaza, and basically said to Israel, okay, finish the job. Until he is ready and willing to do that, Iran is going to heal itself to some degree.
Yeah.
And although part of, obviously, which is the other point I think we need to make, the blockade that we are doing, which is an act of war, our blockading all Iranian shipping is a very big deal, and I'm sure is having a very, very, very significant effect. It's just a much longer term strategy than obviously kinetic involvement, and it all depends on whether or not we have the stomach to hold with that blockade, even if we're not firing, through the summer and maybe into the fall to finally have Iran break, right? But that's, in Abe's analogy, that's the worst Trump. You're telling Trump to pursue a long-term game that will ultimately redound to your benefit, but you can't look for short-term successes. You're talking about something to grind them down and impoverish them and end them that way. And
also,
he likes a big boom.
We're paying costs up front. So I'm not sure I understand politically the move of waiting and this amount of patience, because politically, one of the bigger problems with the war, or the more tangible problems with the war at home, is the effect on gas prices and things like that. And of course, we're seeing news reports about the effect it's going to have maybe on food prices and things like that. That there's down the road knock-on effects from these sorts of things. He's paying for that now because that's an attack line that is, you can't deny that the price of gas, let's say, has gone up when it has gone up. Even if we could put it in context historically and say it's not that much, whatever. But the fact is they have a path of political attack against him that is making Republicans nervous, even more nervous about the midterms. So the blockade is a thing that can help us win the war and is a very big deal, but it is the thing that comes with upfront costs to him politically and spends his political capital. So I'm not sure I understand, to me, if you're paying if the blowback is coming already from the blockade, send the planes in and finish the job, because you're paying. It's like dragging out your student loan payments or something. You're paying now and the interest is piling up. Just get it done, because the reprieve is not a political reprieve. The ceasefire has not provided a political reprieve for Trump at all because of the blockade.
I spend a lot of time wondering why we're in the ceasefire. And there are a few theories. One is, is there a munitions shortage? We hit over 15,000 targets, the U.S. alone. Israel hit about 4,500 on their part, so that's almost 19,000 targets. And of course, we were defending ourselves and our allies from Iranian retaliation. So, is it a question of the munitions aren't there, the interceptors and air defenses aren't there? Now, the Pentagon says that's not the case. Okay, so what's another theory? My theory is, as costly as the ceasefire is, Trump believes that a resumption of conflict would be costlier for this reason. Iran has shifted its target at the outset of the conflict, Iran was directing most of its missiles toward Israel. But as the conflict has developed, and now even into the ceasefire, Israel's not Iran's target. It's the Gulf states. And I think that there's a deep fear that should the war resume, Iran will devote almost all its energies to destroying the Gulf state energy infrastructure. And this would be a suicidal move because it would mean that we would then destroy all the Iranian energy infrastructure. We'd either destroy Karg Island and seize it. We'd go after their electric generators, the other dual-use stuff. But as bad as the energy situation is now, and it's likely to grow worse as the blockade continues, that scenario would send prices even higher in Trump's mind. Now, this is a hypothetical situation. We really don't know. We don't know what Iran's capacities are. We know that they've been severely degraded, right? But I think that's what's keeping Trump in this standoff. But he has to realize that it can't go on forever, because for this reason, the Iranians don't care about their population. This guy Vahidi doesn't care. I mean, what is he? He's a radical. He just wants to resist. And so we know what the Iranian government is getting from the ceasefire. They're getting survival and an opportunity to rebuild, like you say. But I'm not sure what we're getting from the ceasefire, other than, as says, paying these upfront costs for, downstream effects. There's no question Iran is significantly weaker, and the whole mainstream media idea that they're more powerful than ever is baloney. The danger is that Trump grows tired of this situation and says, "Okay, we'll do what you want, and we'll just punt everything, and we'll give you sanctions relief." That, I think, would be the worst outcome. But we're not there yet, and Trump has never really moved in that direction. And just my final point is this. Another reason I spend a lot of time wondering why we're doing what we're doing is Trump says, well, just yesterday he said, I want to give time for peace. I want to give time for peace. I want to let the negotiations play out. But he knows full well that negotiations are not the way to achieve your objectives with Iran. We had negotiations under Obama that resulted in the JCPOA, which Trump called the worst deal in American history, rightly, I believe. Right? Then Trump moved from negotiations in his first term to maximum pressure. That was getting real results. He withdrew from the JCPOA. He was kind of squeezing the economic vice around the Iranians. Biden then attempts to resume negotiations in his term. They went nowhere because the Iranians were intransigent. And when Trump comes back to office, he starts this negotiation dance, but he realizes the only way to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is to bomb Iran. That's what he did in Operation Midnight Hammer, right? And that's what he did with Operation Epic Fury. So I think he needs to kind of listen to himself here. If you want Iran to not get a nuclear weapon, you need to use force. And then, by the way, you can say, we're going to walk away, and if we see you attempting to resume the construction of the missile factories and the nuclear facilities, we'll just bomb you again.
Very importantly, leaks this week, 3 different leaks out of Israel. We can go into them. The obvious one that's the big headline is that the Israelis attempted to free former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad from his house arrest with the idea that he would lead a coup, on February 28th or right after February 28th when we and the Israelis struck in with Epic Fury. This, of course, is the irony of ironies, because the entire Iranian nuclear crisis began in 2005 publicly with the announcement of the election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his campaign speech, which was, my purpose is to eliminate Israel from the face of the earth. That is what lit the Iranian nuclear subject on fire. It's why there were massive protests against Ahmadinejad at the UN and at Columbia University in 2007 when he came to address the UN. he was the figure of the nuclear, of Iran's existential threat to Israel. He was the voice of it. If it now turns out that in some measure or time, at some point in the course of his ex-presidency, that he became an Israeli asset, that is so mind-blowing that it goes beyond all reckoning. But so that's...
Well, I'm not sure if apparently it became an asset so much as they just, it seems like they just back-channeled to him and said, would you be interested in...
Well, we don't... Do we even believe the story? Do we even believe the story?
We don't know, but I will say one of the things that one of the lessons I think from this is the moderating effect that college football fandom can have on a Persian autocrat. Because Ahmadinejad very famously got into American college football, specifically the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry several years ago, and since then, he's obviously been more centered guy. So maybe what they need is football and not a coup.
As Matt has often said, football is the great unifier of America, and maybe it's a unifier worldwide. But either way, even if it's so that's one story. Then there are two other stories. All three stories involve Israelis thinking through what the political next step is after the war should be accompanied by a political strategy for the overthrow of the regime. There's the idea of arming the Kurds and having them come down from the north, or I'm blocking on the third right now, but there was a third anyway. The point is that the Israelis
was the third leak the Barak Ravid story. Talk about that?
Yeah. Which was, I'm sorry, like I'm
phone call, another phone call another tense phone call between Trump and Netanyahu the other day.
Right. No, but there was there was a third strategy.
At the beginning, there was talk of Pahlavi and all that.
Pahlavi. There's the Pahlavi this Kurd strategy. So there were 3 or 4 strategies. The point is that the Israelis have been thinking long and hard and deep about what politically can be done to put pressure on the regime internally to make it collapse from the inside while we're bombing from the outside. And we apparently negged all of those solutions, except if the Ahmadinejad thing happened. We didn't neg that. The thing is that he was either injured in the process of this liberation attempt or went into hiding or was taken prisoner, and he hasn't been seen since. So that didn't work. But we are sitting here.
Sorry, Mahmoud.
But so we're sitting here without a strategy for regime change, because Trump didn't want to do regime change. He wanted the Iranians to do regime change. And the Israelis are like, well, that's all well and good, but maybe regime change needs a little kick in the ass to get going, or some kind of an accelerant to get going, because there's also no historical precedent for like a national uprising that spontaneously combusts a government. That's not how regimes fall. That's not how Russia fell in 1917. It's not how it happens. It always happens in the capital with a coup or some version of a coup, even if it's the Orange Revolution or something like that. You get
Israelis in the region. The Israelis prefer stability, some measure of stability, right? I mean, they were nervous about Syria because Assad fallen in the early years of the war. It really could have meant, ISIS on the border of the Golan. So they do prefer. Egypt was the same thing. So even if they want the Iranian regime gone, the Israelis are very clearly paying more attention to who would govern the country than Trump is, or more concerned about who would govern the country than Trump is.
And Israel doesn't have the historical baggage that Trump is so understandably concerned about, with nation building, picking a successor regime, managing the rebuilding and all that. He wants the U.S. to have no part of that. Israel has no reason at this point not to try its hand out at that process.
I mean, just to go back to Trump's original declaration of war, so to speak, the video he dropped on the early morning of February 28th, most of that text is kind of an indictment of the Iranian regime for its crimes against America, for sowing terrorism, oppressing its people, building this nuclear program, and an explanation that America is going to target its military capacity to remove its ability to threaten us and the region. And then at the end of it, he says, look, to the Iranian people, this is your moment. Now, remember the context that we had these massive protests in Iran beginning last November over the economic consequences of Iranian policy and the sanctions, and also Midnight Hammer. And that resulted in one of the what some experts say is the largest mass slaughtering of a population by a state in modern times. Upward of 40,000 people killed by the Iranian government at the beginning of this year. So I think in Trump's mind there was actually some precedent for kind of a mass mobilization against the government, like we saw with the Green Revolution, like we've seen in the Masa Amini protests, like we just saw this year. It didn't happen, and it's worth asking, why didn't it happen? I always thought it would be hard to expect people to come out in the streets en masse when bombs were falling everywhere. On the other hand, it could just be that the Iranian government has been very effective at killing all of the opposition. In fact, one of the downsides of the ceasefire is that the executions have resumed.
Yeah,
they just killed somebody yesterday.
The internet blackout.
Yeah, the internet blackout is continuing
the whole time. We talk about have we been in the ceasefire longer than the war, but they've been
going
blacked
on
out.
There. It's clear that the Iranian people have not seized this chance. Now, what the Israeli strategy seems to have been was, well, you know what? If we can't count on that mass mobilization, what we're going to do is we're going to sow chaos. So let's have the Kurds invade and distract the Iranian army. Let's, if the Ahmadinejad story is true, let's get him out. Maybe there will be some, right? And I think Trump is the one there who is very much reluctant to embrace kind of a strategy that would lead to state fragmentation and collapse. I mean, that's, again, why that's been limiting his military strategy. He hasn't taken out all the bridges. He hasn't taken out the power plants. We hit a lot of factories for sure, but we haven't gone after their economic, the actual economic base. He always says, well, I don't want to hurt the normal Iranian people. Israel, on the other hand, I think understands that if you want to collapse a regime, you need to create a lot of chaos. That's the way to do it. Right. And so we had this missed opportunity because I think of a difference in aims by the two governments. Just as right now, again, it's clear that if you want to open the Strait of Hormuz, you need to resume Project Freedom, and in order to do that, you're going to have to resume the military campaign for some period of time so that our naval forces have an envelope through which they can begin escorting ships out of the strait. But Trump isn't doing that because he seems to believe the status quo is tolerable and the potential consequences of Iranian strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure are not.
The terrible irony here is that there were, 5-6 weeks of military operations. Everyone in the U.S., all the expected parties, pronounced it a disaster, and we don't know what we're doing, we have no plan, and we haven't achieved this, and we haven't achieved that. None of it was true. It was extraordinarily successful and effective. Then we have the ceasefire. That is the source of all these problems. And Trump, I think, just by virtue of who he is, has more tolerance for a messy ceasefire than a successful, aggressive military campaign. And that is why we are stuck here, I think, more than any other reason.
I mean, it's weird. It's like a reverse Hamlet. the story of Hamlet, as Laurence Olivier said, is it's a tragedy about a man who could not make up his mind. And so finally, by Act 4 and 5, he starts the plan in motion to avenge his father's murder at the hands of his uncle, and succeeds in the end, though he, of course, dies in the process. Here we have Trump going...
No spoilers, John.
All in, to the point that he says, I am going to destroy your civilization. And then something in him says, I believe, oops, I went too far. Ceasefire. Because there was no middle ground between destroying their civilization and then a couple of like conventional strikes to show that you were angry. And now we are in the overhang of I blew my rhetorical wad on how I'm wiping out your civilization. Now what do I do? Anything that I restart, this is the other way of looking at it, is going to look like an also-ran. It's not going to be like Epic Fury. Epic Fury was like this day of, shock and awe the world has never seen. That is not how the restarting of kinetic action against the Iranians will go. It is just essentially the beginning of a new battle. Epic Fury was one battle. Epic continuation will be the next battle, but it's another battle. It's not a new event, and either he can't wrap his mind around it, or he has decided that the status quo, or he hasn't decided anything, and he is so distractible that while he has staked his entire presidency and his entire historical legacy on securing an outcome in Iran that will look like an American victory, he's off with the ballroom. He's got to endorse Paxton. He gets into a fight with this one. He's 47 tweets at night last week over, I don't even know what the hell he was doing on Truth Social in that so he is not focused on the thing. And I keep saying this is a war of choice. There's a whole argument to say it's not a war of choice because inevitably the world was going to have to engage Iran to get it to end its nuclear program. But he had an opportunity. Their opportunity was handed them. The riots inside Iran in November and December, this horrible massacre in early January, and the Israelis coming to him and saying, we have an opportunity to decapitate the regime on February 28th. Let's go. And he said, okay, we're going to go. And now he took an opportunity, and I didn't tell him to take I'm happy he did. He did it. He chose to do this. He could have said, nah, we're not going to do it. He chose to do it. He staked his presidency on it. It's on him now entirely if he wins or loses, because can we win this? Of course we can win this. We have the world's largest military. We've degraded their military down to the wires. They can't resist us. They'll fall. It's all in his head now.
That's why I have a suggestion, which is I think we need to make a formal request to Trump. Because so far, all of his pivotal decisions on the ceasefire have come at the request of other parties. At the request of Pakistan, that was a couple times. Right. Most recently, it was Qatar. At the request of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And I want that tweet. I want that True Social to read, at the request of the Commentary Podcast, I have resumed Project Freedom and Operation Epic Fury in order to open up the strait. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Just make the request. That's what we need to do.
I mean, it is interesting that he finds himself. I mean, I think that's a wonderful idea and would do really great wonders for our advertisers. If you want a nice shirt, if you want a good mattress, it's a whole new universe for our advertisers. But the point here is that this is so much on him that there isn't even any domestic pressure that we hawks can bring to bear on him to get him to restart. Like Tom Cotton, who I'm sure wants this war to restart, there's no populist force behind Tom Cotton that would let him say, let's go and finish this job. Otherwise, this country is going to be humiliated. Like, this is, you will be the greatest man in history if you do this. But if you don't, oh boy, goodbye to you and your legacy.
I think the hawks around him are nervous at the prospect of seeming overly hawkish, being seen as overpromising, and talking and giving Trump a reason to say, you talked me into something that I said from the beginning of my presidency I wasn't going to do. Because in terms of when we talk about appealing to Trump, I mean, Marco Rubio, I'm not sure there's anybody he listens to within the administration more than Marco Rubio, who is, every position. Waltz also at the UN has been in the inner circle, regardless of what his station is. He's been in the inner circle. This has been the case from the beginning. So it's not like you could install someone who with hawkish views who could whisper in his ear. But I do think that there is a nervousness on the part of the hawks around him also, because they understand that this is that moment when everybody was like, oh, look, see, the neocons are running Trump too, and he's going to do Iraq too. And we noticed in the stories about the attacks that Marco Rubio was, tepid on the idea of regime change, and said of the four options, we should really do these two. He agreed with Trump. We should really do these two. I think there's caution all around him, and that the effect of having the hawks around him has not made him that much.
I disagree. Okay. Trump is a hawk.
Trump's the hawk.
Trump's the hawk here. But the issue is he just thinks that he's going to be able to get some deal. He thinks that he has the Iranians so dangling from the ledge that he's going to get this deal after the military thing. And he does it, like I've been saying, he's worried about the potential costs of Iranian drones and missile attacks on those energy facilities. So, but at the end of the day, he hasn't moved from the blockade, and he hasn't moved to give the Iranians the money that they want, because he is the hawk. He does not want Iran to get that nuclear weapon. And by the way, he destroyed the government of one country and then kidnapped the president of another one in 2 months. That's pretty. And now he's thinking about doing the same thing to a third. So he's definitely a hawk. It's not
just that. It's not just that, because he goes to the Pentagon, right? There's the possibility of military action against Iran. So he's like, basically, what plans do we have? And particularly if we involve the Israelis, what plans do we have? And the military, in the person of, forget Hegseth here because he's a political actor, but basically, Kane and Cooper say, we can do whatever you tell us to go, we go. Here's how we would do it. We do this, we do that, we do the other thing. They're now sitting there with the burden of winning the war, and they don't see the action happening outside of their ambit that is leading to a successful resolution. And they may not, particularly because of munitions, and maybe because of just the general feeling that they don't quite know what the mission is now, they've probably got a slightly sour expression on their faces when these conversations happen about what to do next. The Pentagon is not what fantasy leftist, deranged ideas are. The Pentagon is reluctant to use force because it is responsible for the lives of the people who go into battle. They are reluctant to use force. They always want to use overwhelming force because that's the best way to protect our men and women from being injured or hurt or captured or whatever. And I think he's the hawk, but he's also getting vibes from the people who he believes are great and relies on and trusts and even reveres, maybe like Kane and Cooper, that we'll do whatever you want, but you're not telling us what you want. I don't know what you want. here's a plan. We can destroy their infrastructure. Here's a plan. We can open up the strait. Here's a plan. We can take Tehran. I mean, in theory, here's a plan. We can blow up Pickaxe Mountain and go in and get we have to establish a base. It's incredibly dangerous, but we can do it. We can go in and take the uranium out. What do you want? In order of difficulty, it's this, 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 and this. So you might want to go with the first one instead of the fourth one. But you have to tell us what you want. And he can't make his mind up, as far as I can tell. And therefore, I don't even think it's a hawk-dove thing. Or a
well, I don't consider him a dove. I just mean
hawk.
In terms of who is of what kind of advice he's who's appealing to him and why. I think that there's plenty of hawkishness in and around him, but this is a quirk of Trump and his decision making, and it's been all along. But the question also is it leaves us wondering, when the first strikes happened last year on the Iranian nuclear sites on Fordow and Natanz, we had this thing where it was like, all right, you have 2 weeks to come back with a better offer. And then like 36 hours into the 2 weeks, the fighter jets went up. There were a couple times over the course of the past couple years where Trump signaled that he was being patient and waiting, and during that period attacked. And so there's almost been a Pavlovian effect of when he says like, well, let's have another ceasefire. Maybe we'll have a deal. There's this part of my head that goes, oh, I guess that means we're, bombing the hell out of them in 48 hours or something, right? That is also part of the delay, which is that when he delays, it's often not been a real delay. It's often been preparations. And so we don't know if that's what he's doing. We can't assume that, we're not saying he's playing 12-dimensional chess, but he has thrown the head fake twice in recent memory regarding Iran, and there's no reason to think he wouldn't do it a third time. And that has created its own sort of stasis.
The Israelis think he is, I believe. The Israelis believe there's a head fake going on because everybody I know in Israel seems to think that the war's about to restart.
Maybe it is.
I don't. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Regarding Matt's point about these requests that he responds to for new talks, I think each time he gets a request that he grants for one of these resumptions, whoever is giving it to him adds some new sweetener that makes him think this time I hear them, they want to put this on the line, or we're going to be speaking to this party who wasn't involved last time, or something like that, because there was that second Pakistan discussion that never happened, right? Because there was a request, and he said, you know what? This is garbage. So
because the Iranians basically gave us the bird. Arakchi went to Islamabad and then left before we had even taken off. But he was like, "You're staying home."
He knows enough, I think, to know. Okay, you don't just talk to the Iranians for the sake of talking, but I don't think he is sort of quite hardened enough on the fact that you will never be able to get where you want to be with anyone representing the remnants of that regime.
Okay, but ultimately the thing is, the question that you have to ask yourself is there a bird, is there something whispering in his ear where he's saying, I think there is a negotiating partner. There is a negotiating partner, but we don't know who that is. And he can't tell us who it is. And somebody is telling him that there can be a deal, unless he's making this up in his own head to temporize. But it is possible, because this regime is so fragmented, because Arakchi did go to Pakistan and then somebody else told him, get the hell out of there and come home, or we'll kill your wife, or whatever. We don't know. Vahidi is this, and Arakchi is this, and the elected ones, and the IRGC, and all of that.
The Ayatollah's missing.
The Ayatollah's missing. The Ayatollah either today declared that the uranium will never leave Iran, or he didn't, and that story was made up. So maybe he thinks.
We do know he's gay. That's the
Okay,
one
there you
thing we
go.
seem to know for
There
sure.
we go. Okay.
Well,
listen.
the Ayatollah. I picture the scene more like in The Princess Bride, where Miracle Max puts the thing and shoves it in his throat, and then he squeezes his vocal cords and he says "true love," right? That's right. That's what Ayatollah, uranium or no uranium, and then they throw the thing down his throat and they squeeze his, and he says uranium.
Okay. Well, Matt, you have a recommendation that weirdly we're going to do 2 recommendations, but we got to do them fast. So
sure, we'll do them fast. Thank you, John. Today, I'd like to recommend a Netflix documentary, Marty, Life is Short. It's a film by Lawrence Kasdan, director, screenwriter, about his close friend, Martin Short, actor and comedian. It's about an hour and a half long. It's worth your time. You learn a lot about Martin Short. I had not known about his marriage. He's big and to just a wonderful woman who died about a decade ago of cancer. Martin Short, for someone, it's the creator of these amazing characters, Ed Grimley, Frank from the Father of the Bride movies. He starred with Chevy Chase and Steve Martin in Three Amigos. My favorite character of his, the talk show host Jiminy Glick, a celebrity interviewer, very outrageous comedian, full of energy, very interesting life. And my only other point about it is I'm fascinated by coteries, as I say often on the show. And it is remarkable the environment from which Martin Short emerged in the late 1970s, early 80s. He's Canadian. He was interested in singing at first, but then got into acting. And his major theatrical start was as part of this cast of Godspell in Toronto, a cast that featured Victor Garber, the Broadway performer, Eugene Levy, who is Martin Short's best friend, another great comic. Catherine O'Hara was involved.
Gilda Radner.
Gilda Radner was involved.
Paul Schaefer.
Paul Schaefer was there. And then from there, from the Godspell crew, kind of merged into the Toronto Second City improv troupe and then SCTV, and they incorporated figures like John Candy, Rick Moranis, Harold Ramis. And so you're just going through the list of these young people that were all working together and playing off of each other. And it's basically the roster of comic heroes of my life, all coming from this one place. And I think it's interesting to think about how in different cities at different times, groups of people form who just are, they establish a connection and they're able to generate just either remarkable intellectual products or artistic products or even scientific products. So the power of coteries comes from the film, and which is enjoyable because it's not simply a clip show. Martin Short has recorded, hours of home movies. And so the documentary incorporates his home movies. He's just as funny at home, as you'd imagine, as he is on camera. Though my favorite part is when he's busy doing, hijinks with his friend Tom Hanks. And so they give the camera to another one of Martin Short's friends, Steven Spielberg. And so you get to see Steven Spielberg record a home movie, and you will not be surprised. His home movies are better than everyone else's.
Martin Short also has the interesting, funniest guy in the world, tragic life. And he just had a huge tragedy. His oldest daughter died by suicide just like 6 weeks ago.
And the film is dedicated to her and to the memory of Catherine O'Hara. So yes, it's you can see he had just a remarkable way of kind of going through these tragedies. He lost his eldest brother and both his parents in the space of 8 years. He lost his wife, as I said, 10 years ago. Now his daughter and one of his closest friends. But he still keeps that smile and keeps us laughing. So he's a pretty remarkable man.
I just want to say it's the first time that I've seen the Thomas Kuhn theory applied to Canadian comedy.
I'm amazed.
Revolutions, which literally comes from this same idea. How is it that this town, how is this little provincial town in Italy called Florence created, the world revolution? And it was because they actually all happened to be there at the same time. Anyway, my recommendation is Run, Don't Walk, because it right now has a closing date of June 14th, a play on Broadway called Becky Shaw. It is by Gina Gianfrido. It was first performed in 2008, so this is a revival. I'd never heard of it before. It is the funniest American play that I have seen in 25 years, at least. Most brilliantly performed, and just an absolute stunner of a theatrical experience with two amazing star performances from people you will know. One is, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? Patrick Ball, who plays Dr. Langdon on The Pit, who plays a kind of unbelievably, utterly empathic, kind of like feminist man. So very different character from the character that he plays on The Pit. And Alden Ehrenreich, who has been like on the verge of stardom for 15 years as a young actor and was solo in the disastrous effort to do a prequel to the Star Wars movies centering on
Congressional Aid in Oppenheimer.
Congressional Aid in Oppenheimer, and he's in Weapons. Anyway, this is his Broadway debut, and it is literally one of the best performances I have ever seen. So I sound hyperbolic, but this is... So if you are a theater goer and you are anywhere near you, run, do not walk, because it's supposedly closing on June 14th. But maybe if it wins the Revival Tony and Ehrenreich wins a Tony, he's also up for it. Maybe they'll extend its run. But anyway, so think that it's closing on June 14th. That's, what is that? That's like 4 weeks from now. Becky Shaw.
Some of us will be attending the UFC fight on the White House lawn on June 14th, John. So we might not be able to make close, but before then.
Don't go on the closing date then.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So thank you, Matt. As ever, happy Shavuos to all who are expecting delicious cheesecake tonight and a night full of study. I will be myself speaking at the JCC in Manhattan at 12:30 a.m. on the subject, Is America Still the Golden Medina? So if you are going to the Tikkun at the JCC in Manhattan, you can come hear me at 12:30 a.m. That's what it's like to do these things on Shavuot. And otherwise, we will... so we're off tomorrow, and we're off Monday for Memorial Day, so we'll be back on Tuesday. So for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.